The night had the kind of stillness that made every small sound feel like a secret, and yet one man's smallest gesture would ignite a chain of mercy no one saw coming. A stranger was watching, waiting for that moment to change his fate and the lives tied to him. If you believe one quiet act can echo forever like this story, subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The Texas plains lay silent under a curtain of cold rain, the kind that blurred headlights and made even the boldest traveler hurry home. Out on Highway 87, the faint neon flicker of Walker's Diner was the only color left in the gray night. Inside, Ethan Walker wiped down the last table, his reflection bending and breaking across the chrome edge of the counter. 43 years old, tired lines cut deep around his mouth, and the kind of solitude that doesn't come from being alone, but from being forgotten. The bell above the door had gone silent hours ago. He shut off the open sign and pulled on his jacket, stepping into the back alley, where the smell of grease and rain mixed with rust. Behind him, the diner hummed faintly, the ghost of a jukebox that hadn't worked in years still glowing blue in the corner. He lifted the trash lid and dumped what was left of the day's stew-cold chunks of beef-soggy potatoes biscuits gone hard. He was about to turn away when a sound made him pause. Not the wind, not the hum of passing cars. A low, careful growl, not hostile, not warning, but alive. Ethan squinted into the dark. Under the light spilling from the kitchen window stood a German shepherd, tall but lean, its ribs pressing against the thin layer of wet fur. Its ears stood alert, but its tail hung low, uncertain. The dog's gaze fixed on him, calm but watchful. "Well, look at you," Ethan murmured, voice rough from disuse. "You been following me?" The dog didn't move. It only blinked slowly, the rain tracing lines down its muzzle. Ethan gestured toward the trash. "If you're hungry, it's right there." The shepherd didn't approach. Instead, it picked up a dented food can with its teeth limped forward and placed it near his boots. Then it sat down. Ethan frowned. "What, you want me to open it?" The dog's tail moved once the smallest flicker of hope. Against his better judgment, Ethan crouched down and pulled out his pocket knife, slicing the lid open. The smell of the leftover stew rose rich with meat and onion. He pushed the can toward the dog. It waited eyes on him until he nodded. Then it began to eat, slow, careful bites, no growling, no frenzy. Ethan noticed the faint scar circling its neck, the kind that came from a chain worn too long. Rain dripped from its whiskers, and for a second in the glow of the flickering light, it didn't look like a stray. It looked like a soldier out of uniform. "Someone trained you," Ethan whispered. "Didn't they?" The dog paused, glancing up at him with a look that almost seemed to understand. He exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "You're not some random mutt." The words came out softer than he intended. The dog's ears twitched at the tone. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, an old ache he hadn't named in years. He'd seen eyes like that before in the rescue dogs that once worked beside his fire crew, in the burned ruins of homes where life clung to hope by instinct alone. He remembered one shepherd in particular, barking through the smoke to guide him out of a collapsing house. That sound had stayed in his dreams long after the fires stopped, and now standing here, another shepherd had found him. Or maybe the past had. "Where's your handler boy?" he asked. "You lose him or he lose you?" The dog tilted its head, water dripping from its ears, but stayed silent. Lightning split the clouds in the distance, the echo rolling through the valley. Ethan glanced at the sky. "All right, get out of here. Go find shelter." But the dog didn't move. It stared at him, tail twitching, as if waiting for something more. Then, just when he turned toward the door, the shepherd stepped back, gave one low bark, deep and resonant, and disappeared into the rain. Ethan stood for a long moment, the echo of that bark chasing through his ribs. He went back inside, shaking off his jacket, but the air felt different now, less heavy, less empty. He poured himself a cup of black coffee, leaned on the counter, and stared at the puddle forming outside the glass door. Steam rose from the cup, curling like phantom smoke. He'd spent the last 5 years cooking for travelers who never stayed, serving coffee to strangers whose names he forgot before the check was printed. Yet tonight, one creature without a name had left an impression he couldn't shake. He laughed once under his breath. "You're losing it, Walker. Talking to dogs now." But the sound died quickly. He turned off the lights and walked to the small cot behind the kitchen, but sleep came slow. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those amber eyes staring through the dark, proud and wounded all at once. At dawn, the storm had broken. The air smelled of wet earth and bacon grease. Ethan stepped outside, drawn by something he couldn't explain. The alley was empty. Only paw prints remained pressed deep into the mud, leading away toward the open road. He crouched, tracing one with his fingertip. It was large, strong, yet uneven, the right side heavier, as if the dog had a limp. "So that's why you moved slow," he murmured. He stood there for a moment, the morning sun weak behind the clouds. The highway stretched endlessly toward the horizon, a ribbon of silver cutting through nowhere. For reasons he couldn't name, Ethan found himself smiling. "You'll be back," he said to the air. He could almost hear the faint clink of a dog tag that wasn't there. "Yeah," he whispered, "you'll be back." The wind answered with a low whistle through the rusted diner sign, and for the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel the weight of silence pressing down on him. Something had shifted, something small, but real. The quiet beginning of a story neither of them knew had already started. The next evening came quietly. The kind of night where the rain had stopped, but the air still held the memory of it damp and metallic. Ethan Walker arrived at the diner early, his boots leaving prints across the slick pavement. He told himself he was just checking the generator, but deep down he knew he was waiting for that sound again, the steady scrape of paws against asphalt. He'd spent all day thinking about the dog, even caught himself setting aside an extra serving of meatloaf by accident. That wasn't like him. He was practical, closed off, the kind of man who didn't wait for things to come back once they'd gone. But as the clock crept toward midnight, he found himself stepping outside, scanning the alley as though habit had become hope. The world was still except for the soft buzz of the diner's sign. Then from the darkness beyond the dumpster, a shape emerged, soaked and limping, the same German shepherd. Only this time, it wasn't empty-mouthed. It carried something dull and metallic between its teeth. "Well, I'll be damned," Ethan muttered, heart pounding faster than it should. The dog approached slowly, every step deliberate. When it stopped in front of him, it dropped the object at his boots and sat down. Ethan crouched, brushing away the dirt and ash. What he picked up made his throat tighten. A scorched metal badge, its edges melted, but still legible enough to read the engraving, K9 Unit 43, Sergeant Lewis. His chest constricted. "No way," he whispered. His thumb traced the bent surface, the number burning into memory like an old scar reopened. Unit 43 was his old fire division, the one that went down during the Arizona blaze years ago. He had known a Sergeant Lewis back then, a quiet man who worked side by side with his K9 rescue dog. Ethan stared at the shepherd now, disbelief and recognition twisting inside him. "You're from that unit, aren't you?" The dog tilted its head slightly, its wet fur gleaming under the dim light. "You worked that fire," Ethan said, voice trembling. "You and Lewis." The wind pushed through the alley, whistling like a whisper of the past. Ethan rubbed his temples, flashes of orange and smoke flooding back the sound of sirens, the roar of collapsing timber, the echo of a dog barking through chaos. His breathing quickened. He remembered pulling victims out of the blaze, Lewis shouting for his K9 to stay close. But Lewis never made it back. They said both man and dog perished. Yet here stood this shepherd, scarred and alive, carrying proof from the ashes. "You shouldn't exist," Ethan muttered under his breath. The dog stood perfectly still, eyes locked on him. Its fur was darker now, slick with rain and soot, but beneath the grime was a disciplined posture no stray could fake. Ethan dropped to one knee. "If you're a real boy, if you came from that..." He couldn't finish. The dog stepped forward and pressed its nose to the badge as if confirming its ownership, then nudged Ethan's hand gently. The simple gesture made his chest ache. "You came back for me." The dog's ears perked, responding to the emotion more than the words. Ethan swallowed hard. "I was there too," he said quietly. "Same fire. I made it out when you and Lewis didn't." He felt foolish talking to a dog, yet something deep told him it understood. He looked at the badge again, burned scarred but not destroyed. Neither was he. Maybe they were both remnants of the same storm. Lightning flashed in the distance, the same direction the dog had come from. Ethan pocketed the badge. "All right," he said softly. "You hungry again?" The dog sat waiting. Ethan went inside, grabbed the plate he'd saved, and placed it on the step. The shepherd ate in silence, eyes flicking up every few seconds, never losing awareness of its surroundings. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, studying it. The limp was worse tonight, the right paw dragging slightly. He should have called animal control, but that thought disappeared the moment the dog glanced at him again. That same proud, quiet loyalty was there something Ethan hadn't seen since his own service days. He took a breath and said almost instinctively, "Sit, soldier." The dog obeyed immediately, lowering itself into perfect form, head-high eyes forward. Ethan froze, the air leaving his lungs. He hadn't said that phrase in years, not since command drills with the old unit. It wasn't a common order, not one a random stray would know. The storm in his chest turned to stillness, the kind that comes when something impossible starts making sense. He knelt again, voice barely above a whisper. "You're trained. You're K9, aren't you?" The dog didn't bark, didn't move, just stared, as though waiting for the next command. "Where have you been all this time?" he asked, but there was no answer. Only silence, thick and knowing. He noticed then that the dog's fur smelled faintly of smoke, not from the rain or the alley, but from something deeper, older, like it carried the fire with it still. A ghost of what it had survived. Ethan reached out and touched the collarless neck. The dog didn't flinch. Its breathing slowed, steady and calm, as if being close to him was enough to ease whatever haunted it. Ethan hadn't believed in signs since his wife's death, but this felt like one. Something sent this creature back into his path. Maybe not by chance, but by purpose. "If you made it out," he whispered. "Maybe there's more of you out there. Maybe Lewis." He trailed off. The thought was too much. He stood wiping rain from his face. "All right, Ranger," he said, suddenly, the name spilling out before he could think. "You earned it." The dog's ears twitched at the sound tail thumping once. "Ranger it is," Ethan said. He looked at the open highway stretching past the diner, the badge heavy in his pocket. A new weight, but not a burden. Morning came slow and heavy, the kind of dawn that didn't bring light, but a dull gray hush over everything. The badge from the night before still lay on the counter, gleaming faintly beside Ethan's untouched coffee. He hadn't slept much. Every creak of the building, every whisper of the wind made him turn his head, listening for that familiar sound of pause. By noon, he had convinced himself it was over, that the dog wouldn't return. But as the day faded, a strange restlessness settled inside him, the kind that made him double-check the back door, even when there was no reason to. The clock struck 11 when he finally grabbed his jacket and stepped outside. The night was cold, but dry. The air smelled faintly of wet asphalt and wood smoke. Ethan crouched near the alley, scanning for any sign of movement. The trash bin was overturned. A can rolled lazily against the wall, leaving streaks of mud. He spotted paw prints again. Ranger's distinctive limp still visible, but this time there was something else beside them. Smaller, lighter, like a child's. His stomach tightened. "You've got company now," he muttered. Without thinking, he followed the tracks as they curved behind the hardware store across the street, his flashlight beam slicing through the dark. The trail led him to a half-collapsed shed, its roof sagging under years of neglect. He heard a faint sound from inside, a muffled cough, followed by a soft whine. Ethan pushed open the door, and the smell of damp wood and cold hit him. His beam caught a pair of eyes, first Ranger's glowing gold, in the dark. Then he saw the rest. Curled up beside the dog was a small boy, maybe 8 or 9, wrapped in a filthy blanket. His face was pale, lips, cracked eyes wide with fear. Ranger stood protectively over him, a silent guardian. "It's okay," Ethan said quietly, lowering himself. "I'm not gonna hurt you." The boy clutched at the dog's fur and whispered hoarsely, "He said you were nice. He brings me food. Said it was from you." Ethan blinked words, catching in his throat. What?" The boy nodded weakly. "He leaves it here. He waits till I eat, then goes away. He told me," the child's eyes filled with tears. "He told me not to be scared anymore." Ethan stared at Ranger, who met his gaze calmly, almost proud. The old soldier had been running missions without him delivering meals and comfort to a child in hiding. "How long have you been out here, kid?" Ethan asked. "A week. Maybe more," the boy whispered. "My name's Owen." His stomach growled, breaking the silence. Ethan sighed, taking off his coat and wrapping it around the boy's shoulders. "Come on, Owen, you're freezing." Ranger moved aside as Ethan helped the child stand. Owen leaned heavily on him, trembling but trying not to show it. They walked back to the diner together, the dog trailing close behind, head high, tail low. Inside, the warmth and light made Owen flinch at first, like it was too much. Ethan guided him to a stool by the counter and turned on the stove. "You like soup?" he asked. The boy nodded. Ranger sat nearby, eyes following every motion as Ethan ladled leftover stew into a pot. The smell filled the room, quickly comforting and human. When Ethan set the bowl in front of the boy, Owen hesitated, glancing at the dog. Ranger gave one slow blink, and the boy began to eat. "That's right," Ethan said, softly leaning on the counter. "You're safe now." For a while, the only sounds were the clink of the spoon and the faint hum of the neon light outside. When the bowl was empty, Owen wiped his mouth with his sleeve. "You used to be a firefighter," he said suddenly. Ethan's hand froze on the counter. "How'd you know that?" "He showed me," the boy whispered. "He had a tag, and he barked when I said the number." Ethan's eyes flicked toward Ranger. The dog looked back, unblinking. "You really are something," he murmured. He filled another bowl, half for the dog, half for himself, and set it on the floor. Ranger ate quietly, then rested his head on Owen's knee. The boy smiled for the first time that night. "Can he stay here?" Owen asked, voice small but steady. Ethan hesitated. He'd never been good with attachments. But looking at the pair, the boy and the dog, both rescued from the cold, both somehow belonging here, he realized there was no decision to make. "He's home already," he said. Ranger's tail thumped once like a salute. Later, after Owen had fallen asleep in the back room, wrapped in spare blankets, Ethan sat on the counter stool watching Ranger through the half-open door. The dog lay at the boy's feet, motionless except for the steady rise and fall of his chest. Ethan whispered, "You picked me, didn't you? You brought him here for a reason." Ranger's ear twitched, acknowledging the words without opening his eyes. Ethan looked out the window, the night stretching endless beyond the glass. For years he'd cooked for strangers, but never once felt he'd done something that mattered. Tonight, feeding one child felt heavier, truer than a lifetime of empty plates. He thought about Sergeant Lewis again, about the badge, the fire, the rescue missions. Maybe this was how the universe balanced its losses. The men who couldn't be saved left their courage behind in creatures like this one. "You knew I wouldn't walk away, didn't you?" he said softly. Ranger's tail moved faintly in response. "Yeah," Ethan said, smiling to himself. "You knew." The next morning dawned cold, but clear sunlight spilling across the diner's front windows like honey on cracked glass. Ethan woke early, the smell of bacon drifting from the kitchen. He wasn't used to hearing another voice in the place, But the sound of Owen humming softly as he set the table made him pause in the doorway, coffee cup in hand. Ranger lay on the floor near the counter tail, thumping lazily against the linoleum, his eyes half closed, but alert. The boy looked healthier already, the blue tinge gone from his lips. He was barefoot, hair still damp from the quick bath Ethan had insisted on wearing an oversized flannel shirt that hung past his knees. "You sleep all right?" Ethan asked. Owen nodded. "He stayed with me all night," the boy said, scratching behind Ranger's ear. "Didn't even move." Ethan smiled faintly. That's what he does. Watches. Protects. He poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs and added milk to one, sliding it across the counter. Owen's face brightened. "Coffee, mostly milk," Ethan said. "Don't push your luck, kid." The boy grinned, and for the first time, Ethan saw what he might look like in peace, someone who still had a childhood left to save. They ate in silence for a while. Then Ethan noticed the faint limp in Ranger's stride as the dog moved toward the door. "You hurtin', boy?" he muttered, crouching down. He ran his hand along the shepherd's side fingers, brushing over a patch of uneven fur. When he parted it, his breath caught. Underneath was a long, pale scar, neatly stitched, surgical, not accidental. Just below it, near the shoulder, faint ink traced letters into the skin, R3K9 Rescue Division. Ethan froze, staring at the tattoo, as a chill ran down his spine. "K9 Rescue," he whispered. "You really were one of us." Owen leaned closer. "What does that mean?" Ethan swallowed hard, and his throat dry. "It means this dog used to work, search, and rescue. The kind of units that go into fires, earthquakes, floods, places where people don't always come back." He met Ranger's calm amber eyes and added softly, "You've seen hell, haven't you?" The dog didn't move, didn't blink. He just watched Ethan, breathing slow, steady, patient. Owen looked thoughtful. "He doesn't like sleeping alone. He wakes up if I move too much." Ethan nodded. "Trauma does that. Soldiers get it, dogs too." He reached up and scratched gently along Ranger's neck, where the fur had regrown around the scar. "Somebody took care of you once. Somebody stitched you up, saved your life." He didn't realize he'd said it aloud until Owen asked quietly, "What if it was the man from the badge?" Ethan's head jerked toward him. "What man?" The name, Owen said, pulling something from his pocket, a torn photograph, edges burned and curled. "I found this by the tracks before he brought me food." Ethan took it, hands trembling slightly. The image showed 2 men standing beside a fire truck. One tall with a grin that reached his eyes, the other wearing a uniform with the same badge number etched on his sleeve, K9 Unit 43. Between them sat a younger, leaner version of Ranger, tongue out, tail wagging. The back of the photo was smudged, but one name was still visible in black marker, Lewis. Ethan sat down heavily, staring at the picture until his vision blurred. He remembered now the way Lewis had talked about his dog, about how he believed animals could sense danger before humans did. He remembered Lewis laughing in the locker room, calling his shepherd the real hero. And then the fire, the collapse, the reports afterwards saying both man and dog were lost. You found this?" Ethan asked. Owen nodded. It was under the dirt, like someone buried it. Ethan turned the photo over his thumb, brushing the edge where a scorch mark split across Ranger's face. "Lewis didn't make it," he said softly. "But maybe his partner did." The realization hit him like a wave. Ranger had walked out of that blaze alone, injured, scarred, carrying a piece of his handler's memory. He'd been wandering for years, guided by something deeper than instinct. Maybe loyalty, maybe grief, maybe both. Owen whispered, "Do you think he remembers him?" Ethan looked at the dog again. "I think he remembers everything." Ranger stretched, resting his head on Owen's lap, eyes heavy but peaceful. The boy stroked his fur gently. "He's got a heartbeat like a drum," Owen murmured. "Strong but slow." Ethan smiled faintly. "That's how survivors sound." The diner was quiet, except for the ticking of the clock and the soft hum of the fridge. Ethan placed the photograph beside the badge on the counter, the 2 relics sitting side by side like puzzle pieces long separated. He felt something shift inside him, a heaviness that wasn't pain, but release. "We owe Lewis," he said, finally. "Whatever brought this dog back here, it wasn't random." Owen frowned. "You mean fate? I mean unfinished business," Ethan said. He turned toward Ranger, speaking as if to an old friend. "You're looking for something, aren't you? Or someone?" Ranger's ears twitched, but he stayed silent. "Well," Ethan said quietly, "you found me. That's a start." The day passed slower than most. They fixed the broken jukebox light, patched a leak in the ceiling, and made pancakes for dinner because Owen insisted. Ranger followed every step, lying near them like a silent shadow. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat in the booth near the window, the photo still in his hand. Rain began again, soft and steady, tapping the glass like a heartbeat. The storm came without warning, roaring in from the plains like a living thing. The first flash split the sky just after closing time, lighting the diner's windows in a ghostly white. Ethan was finishing the nightly cleanup, stacking plates and wiping counters, while Owen swept near the door. Ranger lay by the jukebox, head on his paws, but his ears twitched at every rumble of thunder. The storm was heavier than usual, thick with static and the smell of ozone. "We'll ride it out," Ethan said, glancing up at the flickering lights. "She's weathered worse." But even as he said it, a deep unease crawled up his spine. He could feel Ranger's tension rising, the dog's eyes shifting constantly toward the ceiling, the door, the walls, as if he sensed something Ethan couldn't. Lightning struck again, closer, this time, followed by a sharp crack from the back kitchen. Then everything went dark. The silence afterward was strange, thick, and pulsing with hidden sound. "Stay here," Ethan ordered, grabbing the flashlight from the counter. Owen froze, eyes wide. Is it the power? Probably the line. Just sit tight. But when Ethan stepped through the swinging door to the kitchen, a low hiss met him, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. He lifted the beam, and his stomach dropped. A thin plume of smoke curled from the outlet above the fryer. Sparks jumped like angry insects. "Damn it," he muttered, rushing forward. He pulled the main switch, but nothing happened. The breaker was dead. Then in a heartbeat, the oil caught. The hiss turned to a roar. Fire climbed the wall fast, too fast, licking across the ceiling tiles with a sound like tearing cloth. Owen Ethan shouted, bolting back toward the dining room, but the fire spread quicker than thought, rolling across the vent like liquid light. Within seconds, the diner became a furnace. Ranger was already on his feet, barking sharp and low. The smoke alarm screamed. Owen coughed, backing toward the door, eyes streaming. "I can't see, get down," Ethan yelled, grabbing a wet rag from the sink and tossing it toward him. He ran for the boy, but the path was blocked by a curtain of fire. Heat bit into his skin. Ranger darted forward without hesitation, leaping through the smoke, vanishing from sight. Ranger Ethan shouted, but the only answer was the crackle of flames. He circled around the counter, choking vision blurring. The smell of burning plastic filled his lungs. Then came a sound, a sharp bark from beyond the fire, followed by Owen's coughing cry. "He's got me." Ethan shoved a metal tray rack aside, clearing a narrow path, and forced his way through. The heat tore at his clothes. On the other side, Ranger had Owen by the sleeve, dragging him toward the back door. The boy's small hands clung to the dog's collar as Ranger guided him under the thickest smoke. Ethan reached them just as the roof above the fryer groaned. "Go!" he shouted. "Get him out!" Ranger didn't wait. He pushed Owen forward with his shoulder, then turned back toward Ethan, who was still trying to grab the fire extinguisher. The dog barked again, sharp and commanding, as if telling him to move. Ethan coughed hard, one knee hitting the floor. "I'm right behind you," he rasped. But when he looked up, the dog was gone again. The extinguisher failed the heat too much, the flames eating through faster than his body could keep up. He stumbled toward the door, every breath a knife. Then something hit his side, a solid weight knocking him down. Ranger had returned, grabbing his sleeve, just like he had Owen's, pulling him toward the open air. "Good boy," Ethan gasped, but his voice was swallowed by the roar behind them. Together they reached the door, bursting into the storm. Rain hissed as it met the fire's edge, but the flames were too strong. The diner's roof shuddered, sending sparks skyward like dying stars. Ethan dragged Owen a few yards away, collapsing beside him. The boy was crying, coughing alive. "You're all right," Ethan said, pulling him close. "You're safe." He turned toward the diner, but Ranger wasn't there. "Ranger!" he shouted, voice cracking. "Come on, boy! Out!" The fire answered with another deep groan as the roof began to sag inward. "No," Ethan whispered, starting to rise, but Owen clutched his arm. "He went back," the boy cried. "He went to get something." Ethan froze. Through the smoke and fire, he saw a shadow moving low, strong, determined. The glint of metal caught the lightning a flash of the K9 badge in Ranger's jaws. He was bringing it out. Ethan's heart clenched. "Leave it," he screamed, but the wind tore his words apart. The shape disappeared into the flames again, and then the roof caved with a thunderous crash. Fire swallowed the doorway whole. For a long moment, there was nothing but the roar of the storm and the collapse of everything Ethan had rebuilt. He fell to his knees, the rain drenching his hair, mixing with soot and tears. Owen sobbed quietly beside him. Then faintly through the chaos came a sound, a single bark, distant and defiant, rising above the storm. Ethan's head snapped up. Ranger. But no answer followed. The flames hissed and dimmed as rain pounded harder. Hours later, after the fire trucks came and the storm passed, only the blackened skeleton of the diner remained. Ethan sat wrapped in a blanket beside the boy, watching firefighters sift through debris. One of them approached and knelt beside him. "We found this near the back exit," the man said softly, holding out the scorched K9 badge. Ethan took it with shaking hands, clutching it to his chest. It was warm still, as if it remembered the one who carried it out. "Any sign of the dog?" he asked, voice barely audible. The firefighter hesitated. "No, but we found paw prints leading into the woods. Might mean he made it." Ethan nodded slowly, unable to speak. The boy leaned against him, exhausted, whispering, "He saved us." The smell of smoke lingered for days, soaked into the fabric of Ethan's jacket, his skin, even his dreams. He hadn't left the motel room since the fire, except to walk down to what remained of the diner, a blackened shell outlined by yellow tape. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the moment Ranger vanished into the flames, the flash of his tail swallowed by orange light. Owen slept fitfully on the couch, clutching a piece of Ranger's broken collar they had found in the debris. The boy hadn't spoken much since that night. Ethan didn't blame him. Loss had a way of stealing language. The first 2 days were a blur of questions from the fire department, condolences from locals, and the hollow rhythm of bureaucracy trying to measure grief in forms and signatures. Ethan answered mechanically, his voice flat, his mind replaying the same image, Ranger turning back into the fire, not out of fear, but duty. He could still hear that final bark echoing through the storm. The sound burned into his ribs like a scar that would never heal. On the third day, he drove to the site again, ignoring the caution tape, his boots crunching over wet ash. The air still smelled faintly of oil and rain. He knelt beside the ruins of what had been the back door. The firefighter's words haunted him. "We found paw prints heading north." Ethan had followed them that morning, tracing each faint indentation in the mud. The trail led to the creek, where the prints disappeared beneath rushing water. He'd knelt there, rain dripping from his hair, whispering into the gray emptiness, "You made it out, didn't you, boy?" But there was no answer, only the gentle hiss of the current, carrying away everything he couldn't say. Back at the motel, Owen stirred when Ethan entered, rubbing his eyes. "You went again," he said quietly. Ethan nodded, setting down a paper bag of breakfast neither of them wanted. Couldn't sit still. The boy hesitated. "You think he's still out there?" Ethan stared at the coffee cup in his hand, watching the steam fade. "He's tougher than me," he said finally. If there's breath in him, he'll find his way back. Owen looked down, fiddling with the collar fragment. He wouldn't leave us, not for good. Ethan reached out and squeezed the boy's shoulder. No, he wouldn't. The room fell silent again, broken only by the hum of the old heater. Outside, snow began to drift across the parking lot, softening the edges of the world. Each flake reminded Ethan of ash, of how fragile everything was, and how stubbornly it kept falling anyway. By the 5th day, the motel owner stopped charging them. "You've been through enough," she said, sliding a spare key across the counter. "You'll need a place until you figure things out." Ethan thanked her, but couldn't bring himself to unpack. He didn't know what figuring things out meant anymore. The diner was gone. His savings were ash, and the only creature that had made him feel alive again was somewhere out there in the wilderness, wounded and alone. He spent that night sitting by the window, the badge clutched in his hand, tracing its edges over and over. "You didn't die in that fire," he murmured. "Not after everything you survived before." When he finally drifted to sleep, he dreamed of Ranger running through tall grass, the wind carrying the scent of rain and smoke, his body strong again, his eyes bright. In the dream, the dog stopped, turned, and barked, once sharp and clear, before fading into the horizon. He woke up with tears on his face. The next afternoon, a knock came at the door. A man in a weathered jacket stood outside, the kind of stranger who looked like he belonged to the road. "You Walker?" the man asked. Ethan nodded warily. "Name's Dale. I work up at the old quarry north of here. You're the one looking for a shepherd. Hope flared and fear followed it like a shadow." "Yeah," Ethan said quickly. "Why, you see him?" Dale rubbed the back of his neck. "Didn't see much, but I heard something last night, dog barking down near the gulch. Sounded hurt, but stubborn. I tried to call it, but it went quiet." Owen had come to the doorway, eyes wide. "Where exactly?" Ethan demanded. 5 miles north off the service road near the ridge," Dale replied. "If it's yours, he's hanging on. You should hurry before the cold does worse." Ethan didn't wait another second. He grabbed his coat, his keys, and the flashlight from the drawer. "You coming?" he asked the boy. Owen nodded without hesitation, already pulling on his shoes. The drive was rough, the dirt road slick from melting snow trees bowing under ice. They reached the ridge at sunset, the sky bleeding red over the horizon. Ethan parked near the old quarry gate and cut the engine. The silence was thick, broken only by the distant drip of water from melting icicles. "Stay close," he said, handing Owen the flashlight. They moved slowly through the brush, calling softly, "Ranger." The name echoed off the stone walls. No answer. Then faintly from somewhere below came a sound, a low whine barely audible but unmistakable. Owen gasped. "That's him." Ethan's heart hammered. He followed the noise down a narrow slope, rocks shifting under his boots. The sound grew clearer, a bark hoarse and weak but alive. "Ranger," he shouted again. This time, the response came faster, urgent, as if the dog had been waiting for that voice. They reached the base of the quarry, where a shallow pool reflected the dying light. At the far edge, half hidden under a collapsed timber movement flickered, Ethan ran forward, knees splashing through the cold water, but when he reached the spot, the shape was gone. Only paw prints remained in the mud leading toward the trees. "He's moving," Ethan said, scanning the forest edge. "He's still fighting." Owen pointed to the ground. He was here just now. The prints were fresh edges, still wet. Ethan felt a surge of something fierce and bright hope sharpened by love. "We'll find him," he said, voice steady now. The road that led to the mountain was narrow, broken and half swallowed by frost. Ethan drove in silence, his hands gripping the wheel hard enough to whiten his knuckles. Beside him, Owen held the flashlight, even though dawn had already begun to wash the sky with gray. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The faint sound of a bark still echoed in their heads, a fragile lifeline that refused to die. The old quarry workers' directions had pointed them toward the ridge that split the valley in two, a stretch of land people rarely crossed because of rock slides and forgotten logging trails. Ethan didn't care. He'd spent his life running from fires. Now he was running toward one memory that still burned. "He's close," Owen whispered, as if afraid to break the spell. Ethan nodded his jaw tight. "He's close," he repeated, as if saying it would make it true. When they reached the end of the dirt road, the truck could go no farther. The rest would have to be on foot. The ground was slick with frost branches heavy with snow. Each step crunched beneath their boots, echoing off the trees. Every few minutes they stopped to listen, hoping for that sound again, the rasp of a bark, a whine, any sign of life. Hours passed, the cold biting through their coats, but they kept going. Finally, when the light began to fade, Owen stopped. "Look," he said, pointing to the ground. There, pressed into the snow, were paw prints, uneven one dragging slightly. Ethan crouched, touching the edge of one print, his heart pounding. "That's him," he whispered. "That's my boy." The prints led up a narrow incline toward a ridge where an old hunting cabin stood half hidden among the pines. Smoke no longer rose from its chimney, but the faint scent of ash drifted through the air, mixed with something familiar, dog earth and blood. Ethan motioned for Owen to stay back, though he knew the boy wouldn't. They climbed together, breath visible in the cold, following the prints until they ended near the cabin door. Ethan pushed gently, and the old wood creaked open with a sound like a sigh. The room inside was dim, lit only by the gray light slipping through a broken window. And there, lying against the far wall, was Ranger. The shepherd's coat was matted with mud, one side torn, his breathing shallow but steady. His head lifted when Ethan entered, and though his body trembled, his tail moved once in recognition. Ranger Ethan breathed, dropping to his knees beside him. "You did it. You made it." The dog whined softly, his eyes half-lidded but bright. Ethan's hand brushed over his head, then froze. Under Ranger's front paw was a small bundle wrapped in torn cloth. The dog nudged it gently toward him, then laid his head back down as if to say, "This is why I stayed." Ethan's stomach tightened. He carefully unfolded the fabric, and what he found made the world tilt inside was a tiny puppy, no bigger than his hand. Its fur still damp, its body pressed against a scrap of Ranger's coat for warmth. Owen gasped. He had a baby. Ethan shook his head, his voice barely a whisper. No, he saved one. The pup whimpered weakly, searching for heat. Ethan tucked it inside his jacket, feeling the fragile heartbeat flutter against his chest. He looked at Ranger, tears filling his eyes. "You carried it all the way here, didn't you? Through fire, through snow, you never quit." The dog's gaze met his calm and unbroken. Ethan pressed his forehead to Ranger's, the words trembling from his lips. "I thought I lost you." Ranger exhaled slowly, a soft huff that sounded almost like forgiveness. Owen knelt beside them, stroking Ranger's paw. "We found you," he said, his voice cracking. "We really found you." Ethan felt the warmth of the puppy against his heart and realized Ranger hadn't just survived. He had carried a promise out of the fire, a living piece of something new. The three of them stayed there for a while, wrapped in the stillness of that frozen place, listening to the faint rhythm of breathing and wind. When the chill began to bite, Ethan stood carefully. "We need to get you home, soldier," he said. He slid his arms under Ranger's body, lifting him gently. The shepherd was lighter than he expected, his strength burned away by days of struggle, yet he didn't resist. Owen followed close, holding the flashlight low to the ground, guiding their steps. The descent was slow and silent, except for the sound of snow breaking underfoot. The forest around them seemed to lean in, holding its breath. Ethan talked softly to keep himself steady, whispering the same words he used to calm the dog during rescues long ago. "Easy now. We're almost there. You're not alone anymore." When they reached the truck, he laid Ranger carefully on the back seat, covering him with his coat. The dog's chest rose and fell slower now, but steady. Owen sat beside him, one small hand resting on the shepherd's paw. The puppy stirred in Ethan's jacket, its tiny whine cutting through the quiet. "He saved 2 lives," Owen said suddenly. "Yours and the baby's." Ethan nodded, unable to speak. The drive back down the mountain was long, the tires sliding over ice, the night pressing close around them. Every few minutes, Ethan looked in the mirror, checking the faint rise and fall of Ranger's chest. "Hang on, boy," he whispered. "You've made it this far." When they finally reached the edge of town, the streetlights glowed like stars through fog. Ethan pulled up in front of the vet's clinic, banging on the glass until someone came to the door. "He's hurt bad," Ethan said hoarsely. The vet, an older woman named Dr. Keller, ushered them in. As she examined Ranger, she paused at the sight of the bundle in Ethan's arms. "Is that a puppy?" Ethan said. He carried it out of the fire. The vet's eyes softened. The days that followed were measured in small, fragile moments, the quiet hum of the heater, the ticking of the clock on the clinic wall, and the slow, rhythmic sound of Ranger's breathing. Ethan refused to leave his side. He and Owen had turned the vet's back room into a makeshift recovery station. Blankets spread across the floor, water bowls lined up neatly beside the heater. Dr. Keller visited twice a day, changing the bandages and checking the IV drip that kept the shepherd alive. "He's strong," she said one morning, wiping her glasses, "but trauma runs deep. It's not just his body that's tired." Ethan nodded, unable to take his eyes off the dog. Ranger's fur had been cleaned and trimmed, revealing the patchwork of burns and old scars beneath. He looked smaller now, as if the fire had stripped him of everything except his will to endure. The puppy, tiny and pale-furred, slept constantly against Ranger's chest. They'd named her Ember because she was the spark that refused to die out. Owen had taken to sitting beside them for hours, reading from whatever books Dr. Keller brought from the front desk, old veterinary guides, dog care manuals, even children's stories. Ranger never moved, but sometimes his ears twitched when the boy laughed. Each morning, Ethan brewed coffee in the clinic's break room and carried the smell of it back into the recovery room. It reminded him of the diner, the smell of warmth and work and life before the fire. "We'll rebuild," he whispered to Ranger one night. Not the place, the feeling, what it meant. But the shepherd's eyes remained closed, his breathing shallow. On the 3rd day, Dr. Keller pulled Ethan aside. "He's stable, but he's not fighting," she said. "He needs something to come back to." Ethan looked at the floor. He's had nothing but loss. His handler, the fire, now this. "So give him reason," she said softly. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat near the window, watching the snowfall thicken outside. Owen was asleep beside the heater, the puppy curled against his stomach. Ranger lay motionless, his head resting on a folded towel. Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out the old K9 badge, still scorched but intact. He turned it over in his palm, the metal catching the weak light. "You're still here, soldier," he murmured. "You've done enough saving for one life. Let us save you now." The words felt hollow, but saying them made the silence less unbearable. On the 4th day, Owen convinced Ethan to take him into town for supplies. "He needs fresh blankets," the boy insisted, "and maybe a toy for Ember." Ethan smiled faintly. "She's already spoiled." They drove in near silence, stopping at the general store for canned food and a few essentials. The cashier, recognizing them from the local news about the diner fire, offered a quiet nod of sympathy. "They said that dog saved a kid," the man said. "Glad you both made it out," Ethan nodded. "We owe him everything." When they returned, Dr. Keller met them at the door. "Still resting," she said, but there was concern in her tone. His heart beat steady, but faint. "Keep talking to him." That evening, as snow fell in thick sheets, Ethan sat beside Ranger again. Owen had dozed off, Ember snuggled under his arm. Ethan stared at the floor for a long time, lost in thought, before reaching into his bag. He pulled out a small notebook, the one he used to jot recipes back when the diner still stood. Its cover was scorched edges curled, but most of the pages had survived. He opened it and began to read aloud. Let's see. Chili with smoked paprika, 2 pounds of ground beef, 1 can of tomatoes, half a spoon of salt. His voice was soft, steady, the cadence familiar even to his own ears. Cook slow, stir often, and taste as you go. That's the secret. Don't rush the heat. Let it breathe. For a while, nothing changed. Then, as Ethan flipped a page, he heard a faint sigh. He looked up sharply. Ranger's paw had twitched. His tail moved once, barely a whisper of motion, but real. Ethan's heart leapt. Hey, he said softly. You hearing this, buddy? You remember the sound of food cooking, don't you? He kept reading, his voice shaking but determined. And don't forget the cornbread. No meal's complete without it. Another sigh, then a blink. The shepherd's eyes opened slowly, unfocused. At first, then clearer as they found Ethan's face. The room seemed to stop breathing. Welcome back, Ethan whispered, reaching out to touch his head. Ranger blinked again, his gaze flicking to Owen and the puppy. His chest rose in a deeper breath than any he'd taken all week. Dr. Keller, who had been standing quietly at the door, smiled. He chose his reason, she said. Ethan laughed weakly, brushing a hand over his face. Yeah, food, figures. But deep down he knew it wasn't the recipes. It was the voice, the rhythm, the reminder that there was still warmth waiting for him. Over the next few days, Ranger grew stronger. He still couldn't stand long, but his eyes followed Owen's movements now, and sometimes his tail wagged when the boy spoke. Ember toddled across the floor, bumping into everything, earning patient sighs from her guardian. The clinic filled with small sounds again, the clink of bowls, the murmur of voices, the thump of a tail. On the 7th day, Ethan decided to test something. He knelt beside Ranger with a piece of leftover cornbread, holding it near his nose. If you can smell this, you're halfway home, he said. Ranger's nostrils flared slightly, then he lifted his head. Slow, shaky, but determined, he leaned forward and licked Ethan's hand. Owen let out a cheer so loud even Dr. Keller laughed. Winter began to fade slowly, surrendering to the promise of spring. The snow outside the clinic melted into long silver streams that ran down the gutters, whispering of renewal. Inside, life returned in small, steady increments. Ranger's breathing grew stronger, his coat thicker, his eyes brighter. Every morning, Ethan brought him outside for short walks along the frozen path behind the building, while Owen carried Ember in his arms like a treasure too precious to set down. Dr. Keller had warned them that recovery would take months, that Ranger's back leg might never work the same again, but Ethan refused to accept limits. He's fought through worse, he said every day, his tone firm, almost defiant. Ranger stumbled often at first, each step uneven, the limp more pronounced than before, but he never stopped trying. When he fell, he didn't whine. He simply waited for Ethan to steady him, eyes filled with quiet determination. It was the same look Ethan had seen in firefighters crawling through smokemen who knew pain but refused surrender. That's it, Ethan murmured one morning as Ranger lifted his paw again. One more, you're almost there. The shepherd's muscles quivered, his breath coming hard, but the moment his foot touched solid ground, his tail wagged faintly. Owen clapped his hands. He did it. Ethan smiled, blinking away the sting in his eyes. Yeah, he did. Day after day, they repeated the ritual walks at dawn, rests at noon, gentle stretches at night. Ember grew fast, stumbling after Ranger, nipping at his tail, learning from him in silence. Sometimes Ethan caught the older dog watching the puppy with something that looked like pride. It reminded him of how Ranger had looked at Owen during the fire protective patient, and full of purpose. The rhythm of care became a kind of healing for all of them. Owen learned how to mix the dog's medicine. Ethan built a ramp for easier walks and doctor. Keller stopped by less often because she knew they no longer needed her as much. One afternoon, as the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks, Ranger stood at the door, tail wagging, waiting for Ethan to open it. "You ready?" Ethan asked. Ranger barked once the sound strong and sure. They stepped outside together, the wind soft and warm on their faces. Owen laughed when Ember darted ahead, chasing a bird that vanished into the trees. "She's crazy," he said. "She's alive," Ethan replied, watching the shepherds against the light. For the first time since the fire, he didn't feel the weight of loss. He felt motion progress something like faith. A few days later, Ethan received a letter from the insurance company confirming the claim. The diner was gone, yes, but the land was still his. He held the paper for a long time before speaking. "We could rebuild," he said to Owen. The boy's eyes widened. "You mean like before?" Ethan smiled faintly. "No, better." They spent the following week sketching ideas on napkins, scrap paper, anything they could find. Owen wanted big windows for sunlight. Ethan wanted a corner booth dedicated to veterans and first responders. They decided together that the new sign would read, "Ranger's Table." When Dr. Keller heard, she offered to bring in volunteers for the construction. "You've got a whole town pulling for you," she said. "People don't forget a story like yours." Ethan looked down at Ranger, who lay at his feet. "We didn't do it for a story," he said softly. "We did it to survive." Spring arrived in full bloom, and with it came the sound of hammer saws and laughter. The new diner rose from the ashes piece by piece, built with salvaged bricks from the old foundation. Every evening after the workers left, Ethan walked through the skeleton of the building, running his hand along the new counter, imagining the smell of coffee and biscuits once more. Ranger followed close behind, limping less now, his gait steady, his presence a quiet anchor in the chaos of renewal. Owen painted the sign himself, brushing each letter carefully until it gleamed red against a white background. "Ranger's Table," he read aloud. "You think he likes it?" Ethan looked at the dog, who was sitting proudly by the door as if standing guard over his own legacy. "He approves," Ethan said with a grin. When the grand reopening day came, the whole town showed up. The mayor gave a small speech, calling the diner a symbol of resilience, but Ethan barely heard him. He was too busy watching Owen wipe down tables, Dr. Keller laugh with a group of firefighters, and Ranger lying near the door tail sweeping the floor whenever someone approached. The air smelled of bacon and coffee again. Life had returned richer and fuller than before. At noon, Ethan stood behind the counter looking out at the crowd. "We're back," he said quietly. Owen beamed. "No," the boy corrected him. "We're better." As customers poured in, a little girl approached Ranger holding out a piece of cornbread. The old shepherd sniffed it once before taking it gently from her hand. The crowd laughed and the sound filled the room like sunlight. Ethan leaned against the counter watching the scene with a quiet smile. Later that evening, after the last plate had been washed and the lights dimmed, Ethan stepped outside. The sign above the door glowed softly in the dusk. "Ranger's Table." The air was warm, filled with the scent of rain-soaked earth. Ranger limped out beside him, Ember following close behind. "You did good, boy," Ethan said, kneeling beside him. "You kept your promise." The dog looked up, eyes gleaming with a calm that spoke louder than words. Owen came out a moment later holding 2 mugs of cocoa. "For us?" he asked. Ethan took one and handed the other to the boy. "For us," he said. They sat together on the steps, watching the sky fade from gold to violet. The hum of the town drifted in from the distance, cars passing, laughter echoing, life going on. Ranger rested his head on Ethan's knee, his breathing slow and steady. Ember curled at his side. "You think he knows how much he means to us?" Owen asked, softly. Ethan's voice caught before he answered. "He knows," he said. "He's always known." The neon light flickered once above them, reflecting in Ranger's eyes like twin stars. Ethan reached down, resting his hand over the badge now mounted on the diner's wall. "You kept your word, soldier," he whispered. "You brought us home." The first anniversary of the new diner came with the scent of fresh bread and lilacs blooming along the roadside. Spring had arrived early, bringing color to the world again, and every morning sunlight spilled through the wide windows of Ranger's table, warming the polished counter where coffee cups clinked and laughter filled the air. Ethan still arrived before dawn each day, just as he used to when the old diner stood. But now when he turned on the lights, he wasn't alone. Owen had grown taller, more confident handling the register with easy charm, and Ember, now nearly full-grown, padded between tables, greeting familiar faces with wagging tail and bright eyes. Ranger, though slower and gray around the muzzle, still kept his spot by the door, his gaze steady, a quiet guardian of everything they had rebuilt. Ethan often found himself pausing in the middle of his work, just to watch him, feeling the weight of gratitude press into his chest. The old shepherd had outlived every prediction, walking farther, staying stronger, his limp barely noticeable now. Yet Ethan knew time was catching up, just as it does with all warriors when peace finally settles in their bones. Still, Ranger didn't slow down much. He greeted every customer, comforted every crying child, and somehow knew exactly when to rest his head on the lap of someone who looked like they'd lost more than they could say. People began to visit not just for the food, but for him. They left donations at the counter for Ranger's Fund, an idea Owen had started after a lost puppy wandered in one stormy night. With those donations, Ethan and Owen partnered with Dr. Keller to create a small rescue shelter behind the diner, a place for animals like Ranger who needed a second chance. They called it the Station, and on its wooden door hung a sign carved by the same local carpenter who had built the diner tables where the lost find home. Every week, volunteers gathered there, feeding and caring for strays, while Ethan cooked hot meals for whoever came to help. It became more than a business. It became a community, a promise turned real. Sometimes when the evening quiet settled, Ethan would sit outside the shelter, Ranger lying beside him, watching the horizon fade into gold. "You did this," Ethan would whisper. "You turned one act of kindness into something that won't end with us." Ranger would lift his head, ears twitching, and Ethan could almost believe the dog understood every word. The year passed in a blur of small miracles. The shelter grew. Owen won a community award for his volunteer work, and Ethan found peace in places he hadn't thought to look. He didn't wake at night haunted by the fire anymore. The weight in his chest had been replaced by something steady and warm. Life had rhythm again, simple, honest, full. But as autumn crept in, the air turned sharp, and Ethan began to notice the change in Ranger. The shepherd tired more easily, his walk shorter, his naps longer. Ember seemed to sense it too. She followed him closely, rarely leaving his side. "He's getting old," Owen said one evening, his voice quiet as he dried dishes. Ethan nodded slowly. "He's earned it." Ranger's eyes had clouded slightly, but they still held that same patient fire. On colder nights, Ethan laid an extra blanket near the heater and sat beside him, reading aloud from his old recipe notebook, the same way he had during recovery. Ranger would close his eyes, breathing in rhythm to the sound, as though those words carried him back through every good memory they'd made. Then came the morning that changed everything. The day broke soft and golden, the kind of light that made the diner glow like a painting. Ethan arrived early as usual, but when he unlocked the door, he noticed Ranger wasn't at his usual spot. Panic flared sharp and quick. "Ranger," he called, stepping outside. He found him lying on the porch under the sign that bore his name, head resting between his paws, Ember curled against his chest. The shepherd lifted his gaze when he heard the voice, tail moving, once weak but certain. Ethan knelt beside him, brushing a hand over his fur. "Hey, old friend," he said softly. "You came out to see the sunrise without me." Ranger blinked slowly, his breath shallow but calm. The morning light caught in his eyes, turning them gold again for one last time. Owen came to the door, his voice breaking. "Is he?" Ethan shook his head gently. "He's still here." They sat with him, the three of them, as the world woke around them. Birds sang in the distance, Coffee began to brew inside, and a few early customers waved from across the street, unaware that something sacred was unfolding in the quiet of that porch. Ethan placed his hand over Ranger's heart, feeling the steady rhythm begin to slow. "You can rest now," he whispered. "You've kept every promise." Ranger's eyes softened, and he released one final exhale that felt more like peace than parting. The stillness that followed wasn't empty. It was full of gratitude, of memory, of everything he'd given them. Owen leaned into Ethan's shoulder, tears slipping silently down his cheeks. Ember pressed her nose against Ranger's fur and stayed there motionless. The diner sign above them flickered once, as if acknowledging the passing of its guardian. When the first customers arrived that morning, Ethan had already set out a framed photo on the counter, Ranger lying under the diner sign, Ember by his side, sunlight wrapping them both in gold. Beside it, he placed the K9 badge and a small card that read, "In loving memory of Ranger whose heart built this home." The day passed in a quiet hum of condolences, hugs, and shared stories. Strangers spoke of the times Ranger had comforted them. Children drew pictures of him with halos, and firefighters left their unit patches on the counter. That night, as the diner emptied, Ethan stepped outside again, the sky deep blue and full of stars. The sign above the door glowed steady now, casting a warm light across the porch. Ember sat beside him, her head resting where Ranger once lay. Owen joined them silent for a long while before speaking. "Do you think dogs know when they've done enough good in the world?" Ethan smiled, though his eyes shimmered. "Yeah," he said softly. "They just never stop doing it." They watched the town lights flicker in the distance, the sound of laughter and life drifting faintly through the wind. Ethan reached down and scratched behind Ember's ear. "You've got big paws to fill, kid," he said. The young shepherd looked up her amber eyes, a perfect reflection of her father's, and for a moment Ethan could almost hear that familiar bark again, the one that started it all. "You did it, Ranger," he whispered into the night. "You made kindness contagious." The wind shifted gently, carrying the smell of rain and fresh bread through the streets, as if the world itself was breathing in the lesson he left behind. That courage can be quiet. Love can take the shape of loyalty, and one act of compassion can ripple through generations long after its source is gone. The end. Before we close this story, if this journey touched you in any way, take a second to like this video and subscribe for more stories like it. Tell us in the comments what part of Ranger's story moved you most, the fire, the rescue, or the moment he kept his final promise, and share where you're watching from. Your thoughts remind us that stories about loyalty and kindness still matter, and they help keep Ranger's legacy alive with every voice that joins in.